Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into an absolute masterclass in reconstruction. Because, when a massive historic institution starts cracking at the foundation, you can't just slap on a fresh coat of paint and call it a day. No, you have to dig deep, right down into the earth, and pour a completely new concrete base. And that is exactly what we're looking at today.
So, how do you rebuild a broken giant? That's the core question we're tackling, because that is literally what happened to one of European football's most storied institutions. We're going to map out the architectural narrative of a completely shattered club. We'll look exactly at how a visionary leader stepped in and transformed this crumbling edifice into an absolute fortress.
Part 1. A club in crisis. The crumbling foundation.
Okay, let's dive into this. We really need to set the scene here, and honestly, it's a heavy one. The time is the summer of 2000. We're at Celtic Park, and the situation is, it's massive structural disarray. You see, they had this brief, amazing high of capturing what the source text calls the Holy Grail back in 1998, but that momentum had stalled out completely. It was just crushed by the overwhelming reality of the 90s of discontent. The club was suffering from a deeply, deeply fractured dressing room. To give you an idea of just how bad morale had gotten, players were reportedly isolated into these little cliques. The supporters were completely disillusioned, and institutional pride, it was at rock bottom. The very identity of what it meant to be a Celtic player had become dangerously blurred. They were, for lack of a better word, totally lost.
Part 2. The psychological engineer. The blueprint.
But look, you can't just leave a giant sitting in ruins, right? Enter Martin O'Neill. When O'Neill walked through the doors in that summer of 2000, he didn't just inherit a squad of football players, he inherited a massive, club-wide crisis of confidence. He realized right off the bat that just tweaking the tactics, that wasn't going to cut it. He had to be more than a manager. He actually had to become a psychological engineer. And this idea of psychological architecture was his true blueprint. He basically had to rebuild the foundational belief, the mental resilience required to restore Celtic as a true European giant, not just a team participating in a domestic scramble. So he threw out the whole idea that they needed to play pretty football to honor their history. Instead, he designed a totally new mindset, an identity that was unapologetically direct, physically imposing, and mentally unbreakable.
To do this, O'Neill used specific individuals as literal structural pillars for this new mindset. He wasn't relying on some fancy magic square to dominate. He needed raw, reliable materials. And what's really interesting here is how each player formed a unique cornerstone. He built his side around Neil Lennon's pure grit, his ability to just outfight the opposition. He utilized Stan Petrov's intense tactical discipline to outwork the midfield. And at the very top of this structure, he completely relied on Henrik Larsson's clinical finishing to outlast the opponent and score. Every single piece had a defined load-bearing purpose.
Part 3. The O'Neill Protocol. The mechanics.
All right, so with the pillars in place, we need to look at how this machine actually operated day to day. This brings us to what the source text calls the O'Neill Protocol, the actual mechanics of how he completely reshaped the culture of that fractured dressing room. O'Neill essentially implemented 3 core rules. First up, the siege mentality. O'Neill was an absolute master of the us versus them narrative. He built this intense bunker mentality, basically convincing his players that the entire footballing establishment was actively rooting against them. To do this, he'd reportedly go as far as pinning up negative press clippings right in the dressing room, just to manufacture this sense of injustice. It was intense. Every single training session became a battle. Every match was a full-on campaign. His man management was a real throwback to high-intensity greats like Jock Stein. Now, let's break down those final 2 mechanics, tactical utility and the Larsson factor.
Think about how this actually plays out tactically. Notice how the aggressive wingbacks, who were often converted midfielders or wingers, would physically force opposing teams deep into a defensive block. O'Neill utilized this very specific 3-5-2 system. It was structurally super rigid, but offensively explosive. Because what does pushing teams into that deep block actually do? It opens up vital, crucial space in the final third. It was a remarkably simple, highly effective system that was just perfectly suited to dominate the Ibrox Parkhead reality of their domestic league.
Which leads us directly into that third protocol, the Larsson factor. As the text says, the entire Celtic machine was designed to feed the beast. O'Neill recognized a fundamental, undeniable truth. When you have a striker like Henrik Larsson, someone who is both technically flawless and mentally elite, your only job as the architect is to put him in positions to score. That's it. The tactics, the grit, those aggressive wingbacks, it was all engineered to serve this one undeniable force.
Part 4.
The 2003 Seville Journey, the stress test.
So you've got the psychological foundation, the physical pillars, and the mechanical protocol. But every great structure has to survive a major storm to prove it actually works, right? For O'Neill's Celtic, that ultimate stress test came during the 2003 Seville Journey. Just look at how this gauntlet builds across the timeline of that incredible run. The defining moment of O'Neill's era wasn't just another domestic title. It was this exact sequence. Stage 1, they take down the English giant Liverpool. Stage 2, they defeat Germany's Stuttgart. Stage 3, they best Portugal's Boa Vista. All of this leading up to May 2003, the UEFA Cup final in Seville. This was the moment the entire blueprint was proven on the global stage.
And for the thousands and thousands of fans who traveled all the way to Spain, that final wasn't just about a trophy. As our source notes, it was about stepping out of the domestic shadow and reclaiming a global soul. O'Neill proved that even in the modern, heavily globalized era of football, a club armed with a soul and a clear, rigid tactical identity could stand toe-to-toe with the absolute best in Europe. The identity had been fully restored.
Part 5. A Blueprint for 2026, The Enduring Edifice. Now, as fascinating as this historical rebuild is, we have to ask the obvious question. Why does this matter to us today? Let's transition from the past and look at how this acts as a blueprint for 2026. Because O'Neill wasn't just a football manager, he was a rebuilder of institutional culture, and the lessons here are totally universal. The crucial takeaways are captured right here in these 3 steps. First, the power of clarity. O'Neill didn't overcomplicate things. He had a system, a perfectly clear message, and a leader in Larsson. He proved that simplicity is a massive competitive advantage. Second, identity as a foundation. He didn't try to rewrite Celtic's history. Rather, he used their community and their specific way as fuel to drive performance. And third, the big match temperament. He engineered a psychology where his team didn't just happen to win big games. They walked onto the pitch expecting to win them. And honestly, building that expectation is the hardest yet most absolutely vital part of long-term success.
At the end of the day, Martin O'Neill left Celtic with a trophy cabinet absolutely packed with silverware, yes. But way more importantly, he left a club that actually believed in itself again. He took the broken, fragmented pieces of the 90s and welded them into a team that possessed a genuine aura of invincibility. He bridged the gap between their history and their modern reality. He didn't just rebuild a team, he rebuilt an idea. And as any master architect will tell you, once that foundational idea is solid, the structure will stand the test of time.
Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on. Look at the structures in your own professional life, your own teams, or your own institutions. Are you relying on a crumbling foundation, or are you acting as a psychological engineer? What foundational ideas are you building today to ensure your structure stands the test of time? Keep that in mind as you look at the challenges ahead. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you next time.